A little over 2 years after my divorce, I ran into my ex-husband in the atrium of a children's medical center. He was standing beside the woman who used to be my best friend, one hand resting on a stroller, smiling like the time since our marriage ended had proved him right about everything. Their son was 11 months old. Grant looked at the identification badge clipped to my jacket and said loudly enough for several families near the elevators to hear, "I spent 7 years thinking I couldn't be a father. Turns out, I just had the wrong wife." 5 minutes later, another man walked through the revolving doors. Tessa dropped the baby bottle. That was when Grant stopped smiling. I had come to Franklin Children's Center in Columbus for a meeting about a rehabilitation program my company was helping fund. I was 39, director of operations for a regional network of physical therapy and recovery clinics, and 6 months into the first period of my adult life that felt entirely mine. The meeting was scheduled for 10:30. At 10:17, I stepped out of the parking garage walkway, carrying a leather portfolio, a paper cup of coffee, and a folder of staffing projections for a new pediatric mobility unit. The atrium was bright, despite the gray April morning. 2 stories of glass rose above a fountain shaped like overlapping silver leaves. Children sat at low tables covered with crayons and wooden puzzles, while parents filled out forms or watched the elevators with the tired concentration of people who had already been awake for hours. I noticed the stroller first. It was navy blue, expensive, and parked beside a column painted with cartoon clouds. A small blonde boy sat inside wearing gray overalls and chewing on the ear of a stuffed rabbit. Tessa stood beside him. For 12 years, I had known her well enough to recognize her from across a crowded room. She tucked loose hair behind her right ear when she was nervous, and rested most of her weight on one leg when she had been standing too long. She was thinner than I remembered, her dark hair pulled into a low knot, and she held the stroller handle so tightly that the tendons showed along her wrist. Grant was speaking to a receptionist. He had not changed much. Same broad shoulders, same expensive haircut designed to look effortless, same charcoal coat with the collar turned up as if every hallway were an entrance he had planned. I stopped walking. I wish I could say I felt nothing. That would not be true. I did not still love him, but my body remembered what my mind had spent more than 2 years trying to put away. My chest tightened, and for one irrational second, I felt as though I were back in our old kitchen, waiting for him to explain which failure of his had somehow become mine. I considered taking the west elevators. Then Grant looked up. His face brightened. Some people become uncomfortable when they see someone they betrayed. They avoid eye contact or suddenly discover something urgent on their phone. Grant looked pleased. "Mara." He said my name with the delighted surprise of a man finding an old photograph in which he looked especially good. Tessa turned, and the color left her face. I could have kept walking. I had a meeting upstairs and no obligation to stand in a hospital atrium while the 2 people who had ended my marriage pretended we had all simply drifted apart. Grant was already pushing the stroller toward me. He greeted me as though we were former colleagues meeting by chance, then glanced at my badge and observed that I was still building my life around work. During our marriage, my job had been evidence of whatever flaw he needed me to have. If I stayed late to solve a staffing problem, I was neglectful. If I declined a promotion so I could attend fertility appointments, I lacked ambition. If I was tired, I was cold. If I was hopeful, I was unrealistic. I told him I was there for a program meeting. "Of course you are," Tessa said my name quietly. There had been a time when she knew almost everything about me. She knew which side of the bed I slept on, that I hated raw tomatoes but loved tomato soup, and that I sometimes cried in grocery store parking lots after failed treatment cycles because I could not bear to bring that grief home. She had driven me to one of the hardest appointments of my life after Grant claimed he could not leave work. She had sat beside me afterward and told me I deserved better. At some point, she decided better meant him. The little boy dropped his stuffed rabbit. I bent automatically, picked it up by one ear, and returned it to the tray. Grant introduced him as Noah, emphasizing that he was their son. Noah looked up at me with blue-gray eyes and a serious expression. There was dried applesauce near the corner of his mouth. He had no idea who I was or why the adults around him had suddenly stopped speaking normally. "He's beautiful," I said. Something shifted in Tessa's face. Shame, perhaps. Fear? I could not tell yet. Grant began asking about my life, whether I still lived alone, whether the townhouse was smaller than our old home. The questions sounded casual, but he delivered each one as if he were reading out proof that he had moved upward while I had settled for less. The receptionist behind the desk lowered her eyes to her computer, although her hands had stopped moving. A man holding a little girl near the fountain glanced toward us. An older woman in a red raincoat did not bother pretending not to listen. Grant rested one hand on the stroller. I used to think our marriage failed because we were unlucky. After Noah was born, everything became pretty clear. Tessa asked him to stop, but public attention had always brought out the worst in him. In private, he could be dismissive and cruel. With witnesses, he became theatrical. I spent 7 years thinking I couldn't be a father. Turns out, I just had the wrong wife. The words settled over the atrium. Someone near the elevators inhaled sharply. Tessa closed her eyes. For years, Grant had used my desire for a child as a way into the most vulnerable part of me. He could mention another failed cycle, another appointment, another month when my body had not done what we begged it to do, and I would spend the rest of the argument defending myself. That morning, the old reflex did not come. I reminded him there were children nearby and suggested he lower his voice. He accused me of still trying to manage everyone. No, just you. That earned the reaction he wanted from the room, so he continued. Leaving me, he announced, had been the best decision of his life. Now he had a real family. I looked at Tessa. She was staring at the floor. That mattered. During the divorce, I had pictured her enjoying every part of what she had taken. My kitchen, my husband, the future I had spent years trying to protect. Standing there, she looked like a woman bracing against something that had already begun to move. Grant waited for tears or anger. What he wanted was proof that he could still reach me. I looked at Noah, then at Tessa, and finally at him. "Are you sure?" His smile paused. He demanded to know what I meant, but I took a sip of coffee and told him it meant nothing. Before he could press further, the revolving doors turned. A tall man in a dark paramedic jacket entered the atrium, brushed rain from his shoulders, and looked toward the reception desk. He was around 40, with closely cropped brown hair and the tired posture of someone coming off a long shift. Tessa saw him. The bottle slipped from her hand, struck the floor, and rolled beneath the stroller. Noah startled and began to cry. The man had seen her now. He walked toward us with the careful purpose of someone who had already spent weeks deciding what to say. "Tessa." She lifted Noah from the stroller and told him this was not the place. Daniel Reed introduced himself to Grant, explained that he had tried to contact Tessa repeatedly, and said his attorney had already been involved. "You stopped answering me," he told her. "So I filed." Grant asked what he had filed. "A petition to establish paternity." The atrium went quiet again. Grant stared at Daniel, then at Tessa, and finally at Noah. For the first time that morning, he seemed unable to decide what expression belonged on his face. Then he turned to me and accused me of arranging the entire encounter. I told him I had never seen Daniel before. Through communications connected to the pending case, Daniel's attorney had learned that Noah was undergoing blood work for a pediatric evaluation. Daniel explained that if there was a chance he was the father, he wanted the doctors to have his family history. The explanation was ordinary. That made it worse for Grant. There was no elaborate trap, only dates, unanswered calls, legal paperwork, and a man who had finally stopped allowing himself to be ignored. Grant pointed at me. She knows something. I did not know who Noah's father was. I knew only that Grant had spent years using other people's uncertainty to protect himself. I know you should take the test. His face lost color. My phone buzzed with a message from the meeting coordinator asking whether I was in the building. I set my coffee on a side table and adjusted the folder under my arm. Grant followed me toward the elevators, insisting I could not walk away after causing this. I told him once more that I had not caused it. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Through the narrowing gap, I saw Grant beside Tessa, who held the crying child, while Daniel remained several feet away. The bottle was still on the floor between them. For years, Grant had decided what every scene meant. That morning, he could not. 3 years earlier, I still believed our marriage was difficult because grief had changed us both. We had been married for 11 years and spent 7 of them trying to have a child. At first, trying was hopeful. We bought vitamins, downloaded apps, and laughed about turning something intimate into a calendar project. After a year, the laughter stopped. We saw my gynecologist, then a reproductive endocrinologist. I went through blood tests, ultrasounds, medication, and one treatment cycle that ended with another negative result. The follow-up appointment happened on a Thursday in February. Snow was piled against the clinic windows, and the paper gowns stuck to the backs of my legs, while the physician explained that the cycle had failed. Grant texted 20 minutes before the appointment. Investor issue. Can't get away. Call me after. Tessa drove me home. She did not ask whether I wanted to talk. She already knew I did not. She stopped at the pharmacy for ginger tea, plain crackers, and the adhesive remover my skin tolerated, then let herself into our kitchen and put the kettle on. The medications were still spread across the table in a plastic organizer. Syringes, alcohol wipes, gauze, empty cartons with dates written across the tops. My mother was supposed to stop by later with soup, and I could not bear the idea of answering questions. Tessa packed everything into the gray canvas bag I kept beneath the sink. She did it carefully, checking the caps and folding the instruction sheets before sliding the bag behind the cleaning supplies. Then she helped me remove the medical tape from my abdomen. I sat on the edge of the bathtub while she soaked each corner with adhesive remover and pulled slowly so the skin would not tear. Neither of us spoke until she saw the bruising. She knelt on the tile in front of me and looked up. You don't have to explain this to anyone tonight. I asked what I was supposed to tell my mother if she noticed. Tessa considered it and suggested saying I had strained a muscle during a clinic inspection and was using a heat patch. It was a weak excuse, but she delivered it with such calm confidence that I believed she could make anyone accept it. Afterward, she made tea, turned off my phone notifications, and sat on the floor beside the couch while I stared at the dark television. I feel defective. She told me I was not. When I said my body kept failing, she put an arm around me and said I deserved someone who understood what the treatment was costing me. At the time, her care felt like shelter. Later, I understood that she had been given access to every room in which I was most vulnerable. She knew when Grant was absent, when we had argued, when I was too tired to notice a change in his behavior. I do not believe she helped me that afternoon because she had already decided to betray me. People are rarely that cleanly divided. I believe she cared for me. I also believe she later used what that care had taught her. Whenever the specialists requested follow-up testing from Grant, something interfered. Work, travel, insurance, scheduling. He always said the results he had completed were normal. I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too ugly to examine while I was still injecting medication into my stomach. The first time I heard him turn that uncertainty into a public version of our marriage was at his parents' 30th anniversary dinner. The celebration was held in a private room at an Italian restaurant outside Dublin. Grant's mother, Lorraine, had chosen the place because it had white tablecloths and a fireplace no one needed in late May. There were 26 guests, including Grant's sister Caroline, 2 aunts, several cousins, and Tessa, who had been invited because Lorraine considered her part of the family. I almost stayed home. The failed cycle had been 6 weeks earlier, and I had only recently stopped flinching when anyone announced a pregnancy. Grant insisted my absence would create questions, so I wore a navy dress, covered the fading bruises on my stomach, and promised myself I could manage 3 hours. Dinner went well until Lorraine's cousin asked whether we were still trying. The question was not cruel. She had already had 2 glasses of wine and believed concern gave her permission to enter any subject. I said we were taking a break and tried to return the conversation to the anniversary. Grant answered for me. He told the table that all the testing on his side had been completed and that the doctors had found no problem. The difficulty, he explained, was that I treated every part of life like a project. I worked too much, monitored every symptom, and could not relax long enough to let nature do what it was supposed to do. He smiled as he said it, softening the words so they sounded like affection. Aunt Marianne reached across the table and touched my wrist. She said stress could do terrible things to a woman's body and suggested I take a leave from work. Lorraine agreed that sometimes wanting a baby too badly was the very thing preventing it. No one accused me directly. They did not need to. By the time dessert arrived, the room had accepted a complete explanation. Grant was healthy and patient. I was anxious, ambitious, and unable to stop controlling the process. I looked toward Tessa. She did not meet my eyes. She reached for the water pitcher and began refilling glasses, even though no one had asked her to. That silence stayed with me longer than anything Lorraine or Marianne said. I finished dinner, I smiled for photographs, I helped carry anniversary gifts to the car because I could not bear to become the woman who ruined a family celebration over a sensitive question. On the drive home, Grant accused me of embarrassing him. I asked what I had done. He said I had been cold, withdrawn, and visibly offended by people who were only trying to help. When I reminded him that he had discussed my medical treatment in front of 26 people, he said he had been protecting us from awkward questions. The argument ended the way our arguments usually ended. He identified my reaction as the real problem, and I became too tired to keep explaining the original one. The next morning, Tessa called. She said Grant should not have spoken for me, but he had probably panicked and tried to make the conversation less uncomfortable. She told me his family did not mean any harm, and that Lorraine would forget the entire discussion by the following week. I accepted that, because accepting it allowed me to keep both my husband and my closest friend. Months later, that dinner would return to me in pieces. Tessa's eyes on the water pitcher, Lorraine's advice that I relax, Grant's easy certainty that everything on his side was normal. At the time, I filed it under humiliation and kept going. I did not know it was evidence. I discovered the affair in my car. My mother had invited us to dinner for her 65th birthday. Grant said he would meet us there after work, and Tessa came to the house early because she wanted help choosing a gift. Her phone connected automatically to my car's Bluetooth system. Halfway down the street, an incoming voice message played through the speakers. Grant's voice filled the car. I hate sleeping there when you're not with me. Tell her you have a headache and leave early. I'll be at the apartment by 9. Tessa lunged for her phone, but the message had already ended. I pulled over. She tried to tell me it was not what it sounded like, then began crying before she could explain what else it might be. That was how I learned Grant had rented a furnished apartment near his office 6 months earlier. The betrayal was not only that she had slept with my husband. It was that she had known how to enter my house without knocking, where I kept my medication, which appointments Grant had missed, and which words would persuade me that I was imagining distance where none existed. Within 2 weeks, Grant moved into the apartment. Within 2 months, Tessa moved in with him. The divorce took almost a year. Grant fought over furniture, bank accounts, and the value of the house. But the ugliest part was the story he told. He said fertility treatment had consumed me. He told people I had become bitter and cared more about becoming a mother than being a wife. The anniversary dinner had already given his family the framework. He did not need to invent a new explanation. He simply repeated the old one until it became family history. Lorraine called me once during the divorce. She spoke gently and said she hoped I would someday understand that Grant had also suffered. His father, Robert, sent a short message saying he did not want to take sides. Caroline said nothing at all. Their reactions were different, but they had the same practical result. Grant's version remained unchallenged, because challenging it would have required everyone to revisit a subject they preferred to consider settled. One former neighbor brought me a casserole and said she was sorry things had become so painful. She meant well. She also asked whether I had considered that sometimes a marriage could not survive the pressure of infertility. I thanked her for the food and closed the door. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, looking at the covered casserole, and understood that Grant had given people a way to pity me without questioning him. The night before I moved out of our house, I packed the last boxes alone. In the back of a desk drawer, beneath old appliance manuals, I found an opened envelope from Midwestern Male Reproductive Health. It was addressed to Grant. The envelope was empty. The appointment date printed near the address caught my attention. It was 2 days before one of my procedures. When Grant came by the next morning, I asked about it. He dismissed it as old testing and repeated that everything had been normal. I reminded him that I had gone through treatment 2 days after the appointment. This obsession is exactly why we ended up here. Versions of that sentence had worked for years. I put the envelope in a box and stopped asking. At that point, the empty envelope did not prove anything. It changed the quality of my doubt. For years, every inconsistency had arrived alone: a delayed appointment, a missing report, an answer that became irritated before it became specific. The envelope connected them. It did not tell me what Grant knew, but it proved there had been something he did not want me to see. 6 months after the divorce became final, a clinic administrator named Helen Brooks called me. Midwestern Male Reproductive Health had merged with another practice, and during the transfer, they found returned correspondence connected to an old joint fertility case. Helen did not offer me Grant's private medical file. She explained that the packet contained documents addressed to both spouses and copies of forms from our joint treatment planning. I picked it up the next afternoon. The clinic was half empty. Boxes lined the reception area, and framed photographs had been removed from the walls, leaving pale rectangles in the paint. Helen checked my identification and handed me a sealed packet across a desk that had already been cleared of everything except a telephone and a stapler. Most of the pages were familiar: consent forms, appointment schedules, treatment summaries. Then I found a letter dated 18 months before Grant left me. It was addressed to both of us. The language was restrained. Grant had received a separate diagnostic result requiring follow-up counseling, and our treatment recommendations as a couple were not supposed to continue until that consultation occurred. Attached to the letter was an acknowledgement page bearing Grant's signature. The date beside it was 2 days before my procedure. I read the document 3 times. I did not have his diagnosis, and I did not need it. The letter proved that he had received a significant result, had been asked to return, and had signed confirmation that he knew. 2 days later, he had held my hand in a recovery room and told me his tests were normal. My attorney, Evelyn Price, read the letter and explained that it might support a legal claim, depending on what damages I wanted to pursue. I told her I did not want money and could not yet say what I did want. She advised me not to think first about what the letter could do to Grant. The more important question was what the truth changed for me. At first, I interpreted his decision generously. Not kindly exactly, but in the least damaging way available. I assumed he had been ashamed. I imagined him sitting alone in a clinic parking lot with the letter folded in his coat pocket, unable to admit that the result might involve him. Masculinity, fear, denial, those explanations allowed me to believe he had made one cowardly decision and then become trapped inside it. That version still made him dishonest. It also made him frightened rather than deliberate. For several months, that was the explanation I carried. The letter changed one thing immediately. It removed the certainty that my body had caused our failure. It did not yet explain what Grant had done with that uncertainty afterward. I placed the packet in a fireproof box in my new townhouse and did nothing. For a while, silence felt like peace. I sold the old house, accepted a promotion, and moved closer to the clinics I managed. I painted the new kitchen a deep blue Grant would have called impractical, bought a dining table small enough for 4, and stopped apologizing when only 1 chair was used. I began sleeping through the night. Several months after I received the packet, Tessa announced she was pregnant. The photograph appeared online 9 months after she and Grant claimed their relationship had officially begun. They stood in front of white hydrangeas with his hand over hers on her stomach. Grant wrote, "Some dreams arrive when you finally choose the right life." Noah was born the following spring. Grant posted from the hospital, "My son, my proof that life knows what it's doing." That word stayed with me. Proof. A child was not proof that a man was good or that his former wife had failed. Grant used Noah that way anyway. The post was shared through his family. Lorraine wrote that prayers were answered in their own time. Aunt Marianne commented that sometimes the body knew when a situation was wrong and when it was right. She had been at the anniversary dinner. I stared at her comment until the screen dimmed. I could see that the old story was rewarding Grant. His family treated Noah as confirmation that they had understood our marriage correctly. Their sympathy remained with him, and the affair was easier to recast as the beginning of the life he had deserved all along. Even then, I explained most of it as passivity. I thought Grant had lied from fear, then failed to correct the conclusions other people drew because those conclusions spared him embarrassment. I believed he accepted the praise and sympathy without looking too closely at what they cost me. Cowardly, certainly. Self-serving, probably. I had not yet understood how actively he would use the same story once he needed it again. I considered sending him the clinic letter. I never did. The morning I saw them at Franklin Children's Center, my meeting lasted until noon. I presented staffing projections, answered questions about insurance reimbursement, and discussed the opening timeline for the new rehabilitation wing. No one in the conference room knew that 45 minutes earlier, my former husband had accused me of arranging a paternity case in the atrium downstairs. Work helped because it required precision. When the meeting ended, I checked my phone. Grant had called 7 times. Tessa had called twice. His voicemails moved through the same pattern he always used when facts threatened him. First, he demanded to know what I had told Daniel. Then he threatened legal action if I revealed private information. By the third message, he had recast himself as a protective father defending a child from my jealousy. I forwarded everything to Evelyn. Tessa's voicemail was shorter. She said she knew she had no right to ask me for anything, but she needed to understand what I had meant. I did not call either of them. At 6 that evening, Grant appeared outside my townhouse. The doorbell camera showed him beneath the porch light with rain on his coat. Through the intercom, he accused me of bringing Daniel to the hospital and demanded to know what I had found in the clinic records. When I refused to answer, his anger hardened into a threat. "If you show anyone my medical information, I'll destroy you professionally." This conversation is being recorded. He looked up at the camera. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, more quietly, "What did the letter say?" "You should have thought about that before you signed it." The anger slipped, and I saw fear underneath it. That was the first truth he gave me, though he did not mean to. Until then, I had known the letter mattered because of what it contained. His reaction proved it mattered because he remembered choosing to hide it. I ended the call. 2 days later, Grant began calling mutual friends. Jenna, a former colleague, told me he was claiming I had contacted Daniel, arranged the petition, and stalked their family online. "He sounds convincing," she said. "He always does." She asked whether I wanted her to correct people. I told her not yet, although the answer no longer felt like peace. It felt like the old pattern. Grant created a story, and I absorbed the damage because confronting him seemed worse. That evening, Tessa called again. This time I answered. She asked to meet. I refused at first, reminding her that she had sat beside me through treatment and then chosen Grant anyway. She did not defend herself. Instead, she admitted she had found an old clinic invoice in his office, dated before my final treatment cycle, even though he had always told her the problem was mine. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I need to know whether my son's life is about to change." "That answer will come from the test." Her voice broke. "I'm scared." "Being scared doesn't make you entitled to my help." I was not sure she understood, but I agreed to meet her the following evening at a cafe on High Street. Tessa was waiting in the back corner beneath a framed photograph of the old city market. She wore no makeup, her hair was loose, and both hands were wrapped around a cup she had not touched. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she told me the story without making me drag it out of her. She and Daniel had been together for roughly 2 months during the period when Grant moved out of our house, panicked about the divorce, and kept wavering between her and me. Grant knew she had seen someone and knew the dates were close, but he never asked who. "I told him before Noah was born that there was a possibility," she said. "He said Noah was his. He said a test would give you something to use against us. And I wanted to believe him. You wanted the life you had chosen." "Yes." Daniel saw Noah's birthday announcement, counted backward, and contacted her 3 months earlier. She ignored him until he went through an attorney. Noah's hospital appointment was connected to recurring anemia. His pediatrician wanted more complete family history, and some of what Grant provided did not fit. It might have meant nothing, but Daniel wanted the doctors to have his information if the test later confirmed he was Noah's father. When she finished, Tessa looked directly at me. "Did Grant know something during your marriage?" I thought of the joint letter, the signature, and the recovery room where he told me everything on his side was normal. He knew enough to ask questions. He chose not to. Tessa covered her mouth. I told her that was all I would say and that she needed to take the test. She asked what would happen if Daniel was Noah's father. Then Noah deserves adults who tell the truth. The next morning, Tessa called the testing center herself. I learned about it later, not because she asked my permission, but because she sent a short message saying the appointment had been confirmed for Monday at 9. Daniel's attorney had received the details, and the center required all communication to go through the listed parties. Grant discovered the appointment that afternoon. He called the testing center and tried to cancel it, claiming there had been a misunderstanding. Tessa had already placed a note on the file that no changes were to be accepted without her written approval. That was a small procedural decision, but it changed their relationship. For months, Grant had treated uncertainty as something he could manage by deciding which questions were allowed. This was the first time Tessa acted without asking what version of events he preferred. He responded by telling her she was betraying their family. She did not cancel. The following day, Grant contacted Daniel through an attorney, and offered to cover medical expenses connected to Noah, reimburse Daniel's legal fees, and provide an additional payment if Daniel agreed to withdraw the petition and sign a statement that he had no intention of pursuing parental rights. Grant framed it as protection for the child. Daniel's attorney rejected the proposal in writing. The response was brief. Paternity was a factual question, and his client would not accept payment in exchange for avoiding it. Future communication was to remain formal. Grant had always believed money could control the shape of an uncomfortable problem. It could buy privacy, delay, better representation, or cooperation. This time, the money came back. Tessa forwarded the attorney's response to Caroline. Until then, Caroline had tried to remain neutral. She was 5 years older than Grant and had spent most of their adult lives describing his behavior as difficult rather than controlling. During our divorce, she told a mutual friend she did not want to become involved in matters between husband and wife. Neutrality had been comfortable because Grant rarely directed pressure at her. That changed when she saw his messages to Tessa. He told Tessa to pack Noah's things and leave Ohio for several weeks. He threatened to seek full custody if she submitted to the test. He reminded her that the apartment lease, vehicle, and most household accounts were in his name. Caroline drove to their apartment that evening. She did not arrive as a heroic sister ready to expose him. She arrived irritated and defensive, asking why neither of them could handle a private problem without dragging the entire family into it. Then Grant told Tessa she would leave with Noah whether she wanted to or not. Caroline watched Tessa step backward. That changed what she was willing to call the behavior. She helped Tessa pack 2 bags, installed the infant seat in her own car, and told her she and Noah could stay in the guest room. Grant accused Caroline of choosing a stranger over her brother. Tessa was not a stranger. That was part of the problem. Grant had expected everyone close to him to accept whichever version of a relationship kept him in control. Caroline later admitted she had noticed smaller versions of the same pattern for years and preferred not to name them. She did not apologize to me or suddenly become my ally. She simply stopped making her home available to his version of events. That was enough to matter. By the weekend, Grant had lost control of the appointment, failed to buy Daniel's withdrawal, and lost his ability to isolate Tessa. Grant did not simply become louder. Each time one method failed, he reached for another. On Saturday morning, he posted a statement online claiming that bitter people were attacking his family because they could not accept his happiness. He did not use my name, but everyone knew who he meant. Several people believed him. A former neighbor commented that divorce could make people obsessive. One of Grant's business associates wrote that families deserved privacy. Lorraine shared the post without adding a comment. The public lie did not fully fail. It gave him what the original fertility story had given him: a clean role. Patient husband, protective father, victim of a jealous former wife. That was when I finally understood the difference between the first lie and everything that followed. Grant may have hidden the clinic result because he was frightened. He may have opened the letter, felt ashamed, and told himself he needed time. But he had watched me carry the blame. He watched his family comfort him. He watched my work, grief, and medical treatment become explanations for his affair. Later, when the paternity question threatened him, he reached for the same version, deliberately. The first lie may have come from fear. What followed was a choice. The lie survived because it became useful. I called Evelyn and told her I was done being quiet. She advised me not to publish the clinic letter in anger. The narrowest response, she said, would protect me without turning Grant's private medical information into public entertainment. We saved the messages and prepared a factual denial. If Grant directly repeated the fertility accusation, we would use only the part of the letter necessary to prove he had lied. During the next week, Franklin Children's Center asked me to inspect a room that would be converted into a family support space beside the new mobility unit. The room still looked like storage: beige walls, metal shelving, old printer boxes, 2 broken office chairs. A volunteer had begun sorting supplies into plastic bins: blankets, chargers, travel-sized toiletries, diapers, formula, and feeding equipment. I opened one carton and found several packages of baby bottles. For a moment, I stood there with one in my hand. The object itself was ordinary: clear plastic, blue cap, measurement marks along the side. It belonged in a room where frightened parents might arrive without everything they needed. Still, I placed the package on a lower shelf behind a stack of blankets. Then I stepped back and looked at it. A baby bottle had never accused me of anything. Neither had a stroller, a nursery, or another woman's child. Grant had turned those things into evidence because he needed my pain to protect his version of himself. I took the bottles back out and placed them with the other feeding supplies, where anyone entering the room could find them. That small action did not heal me. It returned an ordinary object to its ordinary purpose. The testing took place Monday morning. Grant did not attend. His attorney sent a letter preserving his right to challenge the process, though he had no legal authority to prevent Tessa and Noah from appearing. Tessa arrived early with Caroline. Daniel came alone. No one turned it into a confrontation. Samples were collected, identification was checked, and everyone left through separate doors. The simplicity of the process undermined Grant's story more than drama would have. There was no ambush, no secret laboratory, no emotional bargain. There was only a question he had spent months insisting should not be asked. The results arrived 3 days later. Tessa called from Caroline's house, where she was staying with Noah. Daniel was Noah's biological father. The probability was greater than 99.9%. Grant responded by calling the sample contaminated, accusing Tessa of switching it, and threatening Daniel. Then he refused to cancel Noah's first birthday party because doing so, he said, would confirm the rumors. Tessa asked me to come. I refused. A child's birthday was not a courtroom, and I was not going to help turn it into one. The next morning, Jenna sent me a screenshot from a private neighborhood group. This time, Grant had named me. He claimed I had contacted Daniel and encouraged him to challenge Noah's paternity as revenge for the divorce. He wrote that I had never recovered from being unable to give him a child and was now trying to destroy the family he had built without me. The old fertility story was no longer background. He had used it as a weapon again. By noon, Evelyn had demanded a written retraction. Grant did not retract it. Instead, he announced that he would address the campaign of lies at Noah's birthday gathering, so family and close friends could hear the truth directly. That was when I agreed to attend. Not because Tessa needed me to rescue her. Not because Grant deserved another confrontation. He had made my name part of his performance. Staying away would allow him to define my silence again. The party was held at Brookstone Country Club in a private room overlooking the golf course. Blue and silver balloons framed a 3-tier cake decorated with clouds. Photographs of Noah from each month of his first year covered one wall beneath a banner that read, "Our Greatest Adventure." About 40 people attended: Grant's parents, his business partner and wife, several relatives, and mutual friends from our marriage. Many had accepted his version of the divorce because it required the least discomfort. Some had been at the anniversary dinner years earlier. Lorraine stood near the gift table in a pale blue suit. Robert remained close to the windows, greeting guests with short nods. Aunt Marianne, who had once advised me to relax and work less, carried a wrapped box toward the cake and avoided looking at me. Caroline arrived with Tessa and Noah. She did not make a public declaration of loyalty. She carried the diaper bag and stayed near the exit. Tessa had asked Caroline to hold the spare car keys so Grant could not take them. Those actions said more than a speech would have. I arrived at 3:15. Conversation slowed when I entered. Jenna crossed the room first and said she was surprised I had come. He named me. At the far end, Grant stood near the cake, speaking to his father. When he noticed me, he stopped and spent a second deciding how to respond. Then he smiled and walked over with a champagne glass in his hand. He called my presence inappropriate. I reminded him that he had accused me publicly. When he tried to dismiss the test as something still being challenged, I told him to stop using my name while he challenged it. Caroline approached behind him and said the guests were waiting. She did not argue with him. She simply moved past and stood near the side room where Tessa was feeding Noah. Grant leaned closer. If you say one word about that clinic, I'll say only what's necessary. The document is private. So is my treatment. His father came near enough to hear the last line. Robert looked at Grant, then at me, but he said nothing. That silence was different from the silence during the divorce. Then it had protected Grant. Now it showed uncertainty. By 4 o'clock, the room was full. Tessa came out carrying Noah in a pale blue shirt and tiny suspenders. She looked composed, but she held him close. Daniel stood near the back wall. His presence sent a quiet ripple through the room. Grant walked toward him immediately, but Caroline stepped between them before either man could raise his voice. Daniel looked at Grant. I asked for the test. Mara had nothing to do with it. Then he moved away and remained near the back, watching Noah without joining the argument. At 4:30, staff dimmed the lights near the cake. Grant tapped a spoon against his glass, and conversation stopped. He stood beneath the banner with one hand resting on Noah's high chair. Grant thanked everyone for coming and said his family had been targeted by people who did not respect truth, boundaries, or the welfare of a child. Then he looked directly at me. A year ago, I finally got the family I was meant to have. Noah changed my life, and no false allegation, jealous former spouse, or opportunistic stranger will take that away from us. He raised his glass. To Noah. No one joined him. The silence lasted long enough to become an answer. Tessa stepped forward with a folded report in her hand. The test is final. Daniel is Noah's biological father. Whispers moved through the room. Grant dismissed the result as unreliable, but Tessa did not argue. She placed the report on the table beside the cake and stepped back. For several seconds, Grant stared at it. Then he turned toward me. You started this. Every face in the room shifted in my direction. He accused me of contacting Daniel and using old medical paperwork to punish him because he had a child and I did not. I could have defended myself point by point. I could have listed the dates, repeated Daniel's statement, explained the legal process, or described every message Grant had sent. That was what he expected. If he could force me into a long defense, he could make the truth look like another dispute between former spouses. Instead, I removed one page from my folder. It was the joint clinic letter and the attached acknowledgement page. No diagnosis, no test values. Nothing that needed to be discussed in that room. I looked at Grant. Why did you sign this 2 days before my procedure and tell me your tests were normal? The question changed the room. Grant's eyes moved to the page. He claimed it did not mean what I thought and called the result preliminary. Then why did you tell me everything was normal? He opened his mouth, but did not answer. I held up the acknowledgement page. Your signature is at the bottom. Robert turned fully toward his son. Lorraine lowered her eyes. Across the room, Aunt Marianne stopped looking at me and looked at Grant instead. She had heard him say years earlier that everything on his side had been checked. So had Lorraine. So had Robert. The contradiction did not need to be explained to them. They had helped carry it. Grant tried to hide behind medical context. I understand the date, I said. 2 days after signing the acknowledgement, he had sat beside me after a procedure and repeated that there was no issue on his side. The cost was already clear. I did not need to name a diagnosis or explain a probability. Tessa stared at him. You knew there was a question. You told me there wasn't. Grant tried to argue that uncertainty was not the same as knowledge. It is to me, she said. For the first time, Tessa was not asking him to explain. She had understood the pattern. With me, he had hidden uncertainty and let me carry the blame. With her, he had hidden uncertainty and used Noah to create the family image he wanted. The paternity test had taken away his claim to certainty. The letter took away his moral version of the past. Grant looked around the room, searching for someone willing to help him reframe what had happened. No one did. His business partner studied the floor. Robert remained still. Lorraine picked up Noah's dropped napkin and folded it slowly in her hands. Caroline lifted Tessa's purse from the chair and held it beside her own. The room's silence was not innocence. Some people had believed Grant because his explanation was easier. Others had noticed inconsistencies and decided they were private. A few had offered me sympathy based on a lie, because pity required less courage than questions. Now they understood their part in keeping the story intact. Grant accused me of wanting revenge and hating that he had a son. I hated that you used him to tell people I was defective. He insisted he had never used that word. You didn't need to. I did not let him drag the scene back toward the test. You didn't leave because I failed you. You let me believe that because it protected you. Then you built a new family around the same lie. Grant stepped toward me. Caroline moved between us. She said nothing. She did not need to. Tessa lifted Noah from the high chair. Grant asked where she was going, but she did not answer. She took her purse from Caroline and adjusted Noah against her shoulder. That was the final shift. Grant had gathered everyone there to prove he still controlled the meaning of his family. Instead, the people he had used most directly had stopped carrying his version of events. Daniel remained near the back of the room, silent. Tessa walked toward the door with Noah. I returned the letter to my folder. Grant stared at me. You don't get the last word. I don't need it. I followed Tessa out. No one applauded. I was glad. Applause would have made the moment about winning. There was a child in the middle of it, and none of us had earned the right to celebrate. The legal process took months. A laboratory report established that Daniel was Noah's biological father, but it could not create a relationship overnight. The court arranged a gradual schedule that began with supervised contact. The first visit took place in a family services room with soft mats, shelves of plastic toys, and a table too small for adults. Tessa later told me Daniel arrived carrying 2 bags. One contained diapers, wipes, snacks, extra clothes, and 3 different kinds of sippy cups, because he did not know which one Noah used. The other held toys intended for children at least 2 years older. He had prepared for the visit the way an emergency responder prepared for a scene. Too much equipment, no confidence that any of it would be useful. Noah began crying when Tessa moved toward the door. Daniel froze. The supervisor showed him how Noah liked to be held and explained that he calmed faster when someone rubbed small circles between his shoulders. Daniel wrote that down in a small notebook. He did not call himself Dad. He did not ask Noah to come to him or perform affection for the supervisor. He sat on the floor, rolled a wooden car back and forth, and waited until Noah became curious enough to approach. The visit was awkward. Noah cried twice. Daniel opened the wrong snack and struggled with the stroller buckle at the end. He also returned Noah on time, followed every instruction, and asked what he should bring next week. Biology had answered one question. It had not given him instant closeness. Daniel understood that. Grant had used Noah as proof of his value. Daniel treated the result as a responsibility he had not yet earned the right to feel comfortable inside. That difference mattered. Tessa ended her engagement to Grant, moved into a rented duplex near Caroline, and returned to work 3 days a week. Grant petitioned for continued contact. Because he had acted as Noah's father since birth, the legal questions were more complicated than people expected. The court considered attachment, stability, conduct, and Noah's best interests, rather than treating any adult's humiliation as the deciding factor. Some people wanted a cleaner punishment. Real children deserve more care than that. Grant continued seeing Noah under temporary arrangements while the attorneys worked through the details. What he lost immediately was control. He could no longer decide alone who belonged to the family or use uncertainty to keep everyone in place. 3 days after the party, he removed the post accusing me. Evelyn required a written retraction. It was brief and contained no apology. It made statements concerning Mara Ellison's involvement in a paternity matter that were not supported by evidence. She did not initiate or fund the petition. That was enough. The retraction did not repair every conversation in which people had believed him. It did not erase the anniversary dinner, or the casserole, or the comments beneath Noah's birth announcement. It did something narrower. It put his public accusation back where it belonged, under his name, followed by an admission that he could not support it. Lorraine sent me an email a week later. She did not ask forgiveness. She wrote that she had remembered the anniversary dinner and understood now that Grant had allowed the family to blame me for information he knew was incomplete. She admitted she had preferred the explanation that required the least disruption. I did not answer. Robert left a voicemail saying he should have asked his son a direct question years earlier. I saved it, but did not call back. Caroline sent nothing. Her actions had already been clear. She continued helping Tessa with transportation and remained present during exchanges when Grant was expected to arrive. None of them became my family again. Accountability did not require reunion. 6 weeks after the party, Tessa asked to meet. We chose a cafe near the river, and she arrived early. She apologized without blaming Grant, Daniel, the paternity case, or fear. She admitted she had supported me through treatment while secretly helping destroy my marriage, and had told herself I would recover because I was stronger. You told yourself whatever allowed you to take what you wanted. Yes. Her honesty hurt less than another excuse would have. She said she finally understood what she had done. I believe you understand it now. That doesn't restore the friendship. She accepted that without asking me to reconsider. We agreed that I would not be part of Noah's life, would not help her manage Grant, and did not want updates unless he said or did something involving me directly. Before we left, she admitted Grant had made me sound like someone who had stopped being a person and become only a failed attempt at motherhood. That was convenient for him. I believed it. Yes. She looked down at her hands. The same hands had once removed medical tape from my skin and hidden medication before my mother arrived. For a moment, I remembered the care without pretending it had canceled the betrayal. Both had been real. That was what made the loss permanent. Tessa did not ask me to forgive her. She did not reach for a hug. I appreciated both. Forgiveness did not require giving her access to my life again. Those were separate decisions. In June, Franklin Children's Center approved the rehabilitation partnership. I was asked to oversee the completion of the family support area beside the new mobility unit. The beige walls had been painted a soft blue. The broken chairs were gone. There was now a small kitchen, lockers, reclining seats, and shelves stocked with diapers, blankets, phone chargers, snacks, and feeding supplies. The morning before the opening, I arrived early to inspect the room. Sunlight came through the new windows and fell across the carpet. A volunteer had arranged the bottles in a labeled basket beside formula and cleaning brushes. I picked one up and checked that the packaging was sealed. For a moment, I remembered the bottle rolling across the hospital floor, Tessa frozen beside the stroller, Daniel walking through the revolving doors, and Grant looking at me as though I had caused the truth, simply by knowing it existed. At the time, I thought my question had been about Noah. Are you sure? It had really been about every story Grant had required someone else to believe. Was he sure I was the problem? Was he sure silence meant guilt? Was he sure a child could prove his worth? For years, I asked what my body had failed to do, and whether working less, needing less, or forgiving more might have saved my marriage. The answer had been in the letter all along. My body had told the truth. Grant had not. I returned the bottle to the basket, switched off the overhead lights, and walked toward the opening ceremony.